All right, everyone, welcome to the Real Estate Game Changer Show. My name is Mike McKay, um, based in the Jacksonville, Florida market. For anyone in the Jacksonville, Florida market, if you need help on anything, feel free to reach out to us, send me a message. We are actively buying rentals in the Jacksonville market, so if you have any properties to sell or wholesale, feel free to send me a DM or a message, and I will send you our buy box. Each and every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. On this show, we will dive deep with guests all across the country who are changing the game in real estate. Next week we'll be off because I have a wedding. Apparently, October is the month of weddings. But besides that, we are on every week. And this is a live show, so please make sure to comment with any questions for our guests to answer. This week on the show, we have Hayden Vance, who is the partnership director at Cash Geeks. Cash Geeks, they're based in Jacksonville. They did over 330 deals in 2021. And for the last several years, Hayden has really focused on building relationships with institutional investors, so hedge funds, iBuyers. He's actually one of the most knowledgeable people that I know in that space, and I've talked to a lot of people who are selling to these institutional buyers. And he just has an incredible pulse on the constantly changing adjustments that the institutional buyers are making, especially in this with these recent market changes. He's also going to share insights into how the Cash Geeks team has been adapting rapidly in the shifting market. So, Hayden, welcome to the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. It's a privilege.
Thanks for making the time. So
Yeah.
let's start it off with a nice softball question. What got you
Mm.
started in real estate?
Yeah. So I'll try to condense it as much as possible. So um, it started because I was flipping cars in high school. So
Okay.
when I was like 14, grew up on a farm, had access to tools, and was mechanically inclined. Growing up on a farm, you're fixing stuff here and there. So I wanted to just own cool cars and work on them, and that was kind of how it started. And so I started buying cars in high school, and kind of was turned on to the business aspect of it, where I could negotiate down a price on a car, estimate how much to repair that car, and then resell it. And really, that's the same model that house flipping is.
Okay.
So as the kind of years went on, and from 14 to 18, I went from flipping maybe 10 cars a year to when I was a senior in high school, I was flipping like a good 25 in a year, 30ish.
Wow.
So I had a passion for kind of the business aspect of it, and also just cars in general. But I knew kind of coming out of high school that wouldn't be a long term thing, and
Mm,
initially thought that I would do the college thing. I had saved up this chunk of change that I was going to put myself through college with, and was going to stay in my hometown up in Moscow, Idaho, to go to college, which I did do for like a quarter of one semester. Once we get into like some technical stuff about hedge funds, which we will, I'm going to disclaim right now, lightly educated kid off of a farm in Idaho, right? So
yeah.
a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, I mean, it's stuff that's publicly available, and it's stuff that I just got obsessive with when I was like 18 when I discovered it. And so for the past 5 years, I've self-educated on what all that is. But to be clear, I'm not an analyst. I'm not a crazy economic mind. I'm a self-taught individual from
Hmm.
from humble beginnings. So that's kind of how it started, man. I was so bent out of shape that I had to stay in my hometown for college. Just kind of I wanted to branch out. I wanted to see what else was out there, and so I ended up taking that summer after I graduated high school, and I just lived in the back of a Subaru Outback, and I drove around the country.
Cool.
And I start listening to Bigger Pockets podcasts on that car ride, spending about 120 hours in the car.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm like, wow, this is the same business model that car flipping is. It's just bigger numbers, and I'm got to learn different types of repairs. And I remember getting to Kansas City. So I'm coming from Idaho through Montana, North Dakota, all that good stuff. And as soon as I get to Missouri, like something changes. I'm looking around and all these houses look terrible. There's a lot of really rundown real estate, which I'm from the West Coast. We don't things are generally a little bit more taken care of. Property values are generally a little higher.
Sure.
And so it was like this whole new world was opened up where it's like I'm learning on this car trip that in the same way I target distressed cars, you have to target distressed houses. There's none in Idaho, and I'm driving through the South, and there is tons of decrepit homes everywhere you look.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what sparked it, man. And I couldn't get that out of my brain. I ended up going back up to Idaho, tried to do school. It just couldn't get away from me, man. It was all I thought about. And I made it to about October of that first school year, and I couldn't do it. And I decided I was going to drop out.
You made it real far, about a
And
month in.
yeah. Was never good with school, man. Like in high school, I almost didn't graduate because I skipped school so much to go buy cars in Canada and Seattle and whatever else. Like,
Yeah.
that was what held my interest, and I had supportive parents in terms of like, hey, if you're interested in that and you're learning stuff, go do that. We don't care.
Yeah.
So that kind of set me on the path, and then I had a cousin that was flipping houses virtually, and he had done some deals in
Okay.
Indiana, and he had done a deal in Louisiana, and a couple in his hometown in Bakersfield. And I had heard about it from another cousin who was kind of closer in my age,
Sure.
and so we started just chatting because I was planning on, hey, I'm going to move somewhere and flip houses, and eventually we formed a partnership where I really just ran acquisitions. And I funded some of our marketing campaign, and we picked a city that he wanted to buy in. He would handle the financing and the flip management, and I would do the prospecting, get the contracts, and be boots on the ground. So that was in late 2017. We reached that agreement. I moved here in 2018, like January, February. And that's kind of how it started, man. And then obviously tons of twists and turns between then and now. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And here meaning Jacksonville at that point.
Yep. Yep. Jacksonville.
So you said before you kind of chase distressed properties like you chase distressed cars. Um,
Mhm.
I'm just curious, when you were in the car business, how do you go about chasing distressed cars?
Yeah, so I had a bunch of different keywords alerts set up. So there was like apps that would scrape through Craigslist, and
Hmm.
if your keyword would hit, then you would get like an email notification. So it's so funny because it's a lot of the same stuff that's in real estate. A lot of the same keywords that you want to look for. Like people that are buying wholesale deals off the MLS, it's a very similar strategy.
Okay.
So I had keyword search, need to sell, sell quick, moving, blown engine, blown transmission, needs work, mechanic special, all these keywords. And I
Sure.
would sit in class and I would get emailed these, I had them set up across the whole Pacific Northwest. So
Okay.
I would get notifications as far south as Portland, all the way up into Canada and Boise. And yeah, you negotiate. That was the name of the game. Find the distress and negotiate.
So those alerts would come in, you would just call them, try to feel them out on the phone to see if, like, would you negotiate the wholesale on the phone, or would you get them close enough, or like what was your strategy there?
Yeah, I mean, like pretty much every time I was like, I grew up in a fairly small town, so anytime I was buying a car, I was having to drive like 5 or 6 hours,
Right?
and I was having to take a diesel farm pickup with a car hauler on the back. It gets terrible gas mileage, and I'm filling it with diesel, so like it costs money. Like it would cost me like $300 or $400 in transportation per
Wow.
run.
Yeah.
So if I'm going, I have to be very committed, and the seller has to be very committed.
Hmm.
So, I'll be very upfront with that. I'd say, hey, listen, I'm going to have to blow up an entire day if this is something we want to move forward on. I got to drive all the way out there, pick it up. It's going to cost me money. Last thing I want happening is you selling it from under me. So if we commit, I'll be there tomorrow, but you have to give me your word and whatever else. Same stuff in real estate.
Yep.
Uh, and then, yeah, I mean, you'd get burnt, you'd get burnt
Oh, sure.
occasionally, you know.
That is
Cars
an
weren't what you
infinite
thought
say.
they were. Yeah, literally, it was the perfect industry. Well, I don't even know if I'd call it an industry, but it was the perfect thing for me to do at a young age because there's so many parallels to what we do now.
Yeah,
That is, it was familiar. Like I think that's why my like learning curve was lessened so
sure.
much more when I got into it because it just felt familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that's pretty cool. Um, so you moved to Jacksonville. Um, were you doing anything virtually before you got here, or you really jumped into acquisitions once you kind of hit the ground here?
Yeah, I moved before we started kicking off marketing.
Okay.
Um, and I did the whole drive for dollars, door knocking. Did a lot of that in the first year of business. Um, all the gritty techniques that take the most time.
Sure.
Really kind of started at a ground level in terms of intelligence level of complicated ways that you can go after sellers. I started at the easiest thing to understand, the most base level, and then as business ramped up, obviously you need to spend less time doing certain activities and more time doing others. So we didn't do a ton of deals that first year. That's why I had so many had so much time to go
Yeah.
out and prospect in those ways. But I mean, I learned the city, I learned the neighborhoods. Even though we didn't do a ton of business that first year, I mean, the experience of just getting out there and mixing it up with people, being as young and ignorant and naive as I was at that time, fresh off the
Sure.
farm at 18, it was super pivotal. I needed that time frame of eating crap, doing terrible activities that aren't really the most fun, but they yield the best results.
Yeah.
um, yeah, that was huge.
So how long? Because I see a lot of time people, they jump in the business, they're like, oh, they think they're gonna get a deal in the first week. Oh, I sent out 100 text messages, no one got back to me. I didn't buy a house, right? How long did it
Yeah.
take you when you landed in Jacksonville to buy your first deal?
Dude, I had to start selling insurance because
Okay.
I was starting to run out of money. Yeah. So I took like a commission sales job because I recognized that I needed to get better at sales if I wanted to do good in this industry.
Okay.
So I
Yeah.
wanted to find supplemental activities to kind of iron that, or sharpen that iron. And in addition to that, I was funding the marketing campaigns partially. So it was me and my
Sure.
cousins kind of co-funding a marketing campaign, and I miscalculated how much I was going to spend just living. And we had like a
Yeah.
percentage agreement figured out on the marketing budget. So I ended up pulling out of the marketing budget 5 months in of spending like $3,000 a month.
Wow.
And about a month after I pulled out, my cousin got a deal off of that marketing budget. So I was 1 month away from being included on those profits, basically. So another
Okay.
3 months go by, and I'm still working the acquisitions piece, and then that's how it ultimately happened. So I had like that's really reduced profit share because I couldn't afford to stay in the game. It took a long time. It was painful,
Yeah.
man. I lived very cheaply. Um, yeah, it felt like getting kicked in the teeth. I'm like, if I would have just stayed in one more month, I could have
Yeah.
made all my money back and whatever, right? So from there, it was just like I was too far gone. I was so committed. I had this
Yeah.
money invested. I had all this time invested, and something kind of clicked when that happened. That was right around 9 months of being here,
Wow.
where it's like Cortez method: burn the boats. This is what we're
Yeah.
doing, regardless of how hard it gets. Go
Yeah.
all in as hard as you can, and that's what really kind of spurred the growth the next year. We could pretty close to quadruple our volume the following
Yeah.
year. And it was just
Cool.
because I was in a sense like ready to grow up, ready to be a man, work as hard as I
Yeah.
could.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, it was just momentum from that point, just riding that momentum as long and as far as you can. And really today, I still feel like that was yesterday. Like those years have flown by.
Sure. Yeah.
That you decide it doesn't matter the cost. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
and it makes your life a lot easier once you make that commitment, because you're no longer getting in your own head, and it's just boom, boom, boom. You don't get emotional about it, and I mean that's what's really spurred the growth and the ability to learn.
So you said you took that that insurance job to learn more about sales. What did you take away from there that helped you in acquisitions?
Yeah, so he's a good mentor of mine. I still talk to him to this day. His name is Brandon Wilcox.
Hmm.
He was like this manager of like 5 regional offices for AmeriLife, which was a larger kind of insurance brokerage. I walked into his office just like handing out resumes, and I was looking for something with a salary because I was kind of going broke, but I also was like the type of person that succeeds in a commission only position. So like I needed like 3 months of runway, and I remember explaining this to him in his conference room, and the dude was just sold on me immediately. He gave me a salary, took me under his wing. Uh, he let me like ended up having me manage people eventually. I mean, this guy was just such a blessing in my life at that time.
Yeah.
And his sales approach is a lot like the sales approach that I do now, where it's
Hmm.
question oriented, it's consultative sales.
Yep.
It's how do I serve you, and my needs are last.
Yep.
That whole mindset of how you treat sales, where you genuinely care about somebody,
Hmm.
and you convey that effectively, and you don't have all the answers, and that's okay, and you can tell your prospect that, and all you can do is arm them with as much education to make as good of a decision on their own as possible. And maybe you help them, make a decision, maybe not. It's that whole kind of mindset of, give as much as possible, don't expect anything back, and be a good
Yeah.
person, be genuine. And obviously, there's a lot of more to it than that in terms of like advanced strategy. But he
Sure.
was just genuinely a good person who, had this sort of philosophy with sales, and I adopted that, and it worked really well with real estate. Real estate
Yeah.
is typically people's biggest assets. You're not going to pull one over on people.
Yeah.
It's typically one of the bigger decisions they make financially in their lifetime. So, kind of taking that same mindset and thought process, and then ultimately, really, what it was is just building up the tolerance of not caring to be told no. I was working leads not on my dollar, and I was okay with hearing no by the end of it. And I think that was probably the most valuable thing,
Yeah.
um, is getting the repetitions in, getting beat up enough to where it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I was by the end of that.
Yeah.
Selling life insurance is not a fun product to sell. You're talking about death. You're talking about dismemberment.
Yeah.
So, you're uncomfortable a lot of the times in that kind of arrangement. And that was the best thing for me,
Sure.
because it's really hard to make me uncomfortable now.
Yeah. Yeah. So what were you guys doing for marketing for those first deals? 3 grand a month. You do it for
All direct mail.
all direct mail. Okay.
Yep. And then I would go run appointments. And we
In
had a
person.
VA. Yep. And then we had a VA team that would process the calls, see who was
Okay.
motivated, and then schedule appointments, in tandem with me to go out and see those properties. Yep.
Yeah. So tell me about your first deal, the first one that you got. What did that look like?
Okay, so the first one that I actually got a contract, like I got the signed contract, met him out there, walked him through the process. Um, it was about 9 months in to me being in Jacksonville,
Okay.
and this was this. We were talking before the show. You're like, hey, I'm going to ask you a question about your weirdest seller experience. So I might have to come up with a new one, because the
Okay.
first deal is also probably my weirdest seller experience. Uh, so it was all uphill from there. The president
Yep.
was started at a really manageably horrible level, right? Could only
Okay.
get better. Um, so like we had pre-negotiated this guy to like 60 grand purchase price. It was a house
Okay.
on Martin Luther King Drive in 32219
Okay.
off the Old Kings there.
Oh yeah.
And he had bought it from a house flipper like 4 years prior, so we knew that it was like in decent shape. But the guy was pretty erratic on the phone, so we were assuming there might be, whatever, drywall torn up, whatever else that you can expect with that type of thing. So yeah, I called the guy like to tell him I'm on the way to the house, right? And he like starts going off on this tangent about how like the Lord sent me and like how this was like a holy thing that was happening. I'm like, no, I'm just looking at a house, man. But I didn't really know how to handle it, right? I'm 18.
Sure.
I'm a you know immature and don't know a lot about the world, right? Can't maneuver very well in that conversation. So I'm just like, yeah, whatever, man. Sure, I'll be there soon. Yeah, yeah. Just trying to get through the phone call. He's going off on this crazy tangent. I'm like, okay, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Hang up the
Yep.
phone. Pull up into the driveway. At the time, I'm driving this like 1997 Mazda Prodigy. It's the car that I
Okay.
moved down here with. It's an $1,100 vehicle, no air conditioning, and it's summer. This is like August, and I'm wearing like a suit and stuff. I'm sweating.
Got
Get
a
out of the
suit on?
car. Yeah, I have a suit on. Dude, I don't have a beard. I look like a child. I was very insecure that I wouldn't be taken
Okay.
seriously, so I would overcompensate. But
Okay.
so I show up at this guy's, driveway, pull in, and he comes out the front door yelling hallelujah. And it's like 5 p.m. So people are kind of like home and on their front porches
Yeah.
seeing this crazy interaction happening where this young white kid gets out of this car and there's like you know I couldn't even describe. It felt like I couldn't even describe what was happening, man. It was
Yeah.
like, hallelujah, you're a godsend, come in, like let me show you around. um, and I noticed the guy's like super skinny. He's got big welts in his elbows, big, and like I didn't know a lot, but I knew that, and his eyes were like yellow.
Yeah.
Didn't know a lot, but I know I'm like, okay, this guy's on something for sure.
Yeah.
Um, I get through the front door, look to the right. There's a bed stand next to the front door, entirely covered in pill bottles. Like, oh, okay, this is what we're dealing with. All right.
Whoa. Okay.
And so we walk through the front door. I see the pill bottles. I'm still engaging with him. He's like, hey, before we really get into it, do you mind if we sit and talk about the Bible a little bit? I'm like, okay. He has an L couch with a little coffee table in the middle. I'm sitting
Okay.
on one end of the L. He's on the other. He's got this gigantic Bible, huge, thick Bible, sitting on the edge of the coffee table, kind of at like a 45-degree angle, so we both can see it, right?
Okay.
And he's like starts to read some verses, and then he starts going off on this crazy tangent about like the Catholic Church and how they're the devil, and like it's just crazed. It's a complete fever dream at this point. I have no idea what's happening. I'm like a little afraid. I'm very afraid. So I'm just like agreeing to everything he says because I don't want this guy to like, because I sense some like tension forming and I'm not sure why, because I'm like trying to be as cool as possible.
Sure.
And so he's like saying all these things to me and I'm kind of just nodding along, trying to keep him engaged, not show that I'm, fearful or anything. And all of a sudden he just goes, you just don't get it. And he stands up, slams the Bible shut, and like smacks me over the top of my head, like hard, right? So I'm like jostled, like what is happening? He darts into the kitchen. So I'm like, I have two choices. I can go out the front door
Yeah.
and get out of here, or I have to go follow him into the kitchen and make sure that he's not getting something to like hit me with, stab me with, whatever. I got to see what he's doing. So I make the decision. I'm like, okay, I'm going to follow this guy. So I turn into the kitchen and I'm like, hey, man, I don't know what just happened. Like, I'm agreeing with you, whatever. I'm trying to talk my way out of it. And he kind of starts cooling down, coming back to earth. And then I'm like, why don't you just show me around the house, man? Like, I came here to make you an offer. I'd really like to do that. Although I am appreciative of you, trying to educate me on whatever it is you're trying to educate me on. And
Yeah.
he's like clenching his teeth and he's like talking like, he's like just aggressive. Trying to calm him down. This is going on for about 10 minutes, going back and forth with him.
Jeez.
And his wife comes home. while we're going back and forth in the kitchen. And this is probably the saddest part about this whole story because his wife is wearing scrubs. She clearly just like came back from work, being a nurse somewhere. Totally normal woman. Um, and he just like changes in an instant. As soon as she shows up, he's like a normal person again.
Really?
And they show me through the house to get them down to 45,000. There was no outbursts after that, and we ended up buying it for 45. We put in about 35 or 37, and we sold it for 105, I believe. So I think that the first deal we did, we made just under or right about 30 grand. But I almost lost my life over that 30 grand.
Yeah, jeez, man.
That was the first one.
So someone just
And
guided
and
home
it only gets
solution.
better from there.
Guided home solution just commented, how much mail per week or month were you sending?
Oh goodness. I know that I was spending like 51 cents per piece of mail, and I know my budget was matched by Brad at that time. So I think it was a total of like $6,000 we were spending at 51 cents per letter. I want to say that it was like 5,000 pieces a month we were sending, or 4,500, something like that. But I can do that quick math real quick. That shouldn't be too difficult. But yeah, I want to say it was anywhere from like 5 to 7,000 pieces of mail a month we were sending.
Wow. Okay.
And that wasn't that successful of a strategy. We moved away from mail
Sure.
as time went on.
So, get your first deal. You got proof of concept, right? What happens next at that point? I mean, I know you said you fully took the dive in, but what is your next step after that?
Yeah, so I mean, me and my partner were somewhat loosely working together up to this point. I was doing like my own prospecting activities to find my own deals, and he was kind of doing his own thing, and then we were combining when it made sense. And it wasn't really working out for either of us, so we decided, kind of 9 to 10 months in. Brad actually flew down to Jacksonville. He was thinking about pulling out. And I was like starting to sell a lot of insurance by this time. Started to make a pretty decent living just selling insurance. And so was loosely working when needed, would go negotiate when needed. But I had built up all this kind of sales acumen in that time frame. So he flew down here, and we kind of decided together, like, hey, maybe we give this one last shot, give it our all. I'll quit what I'm doing. You quit what you're doing. We just centralize all efforts into the same common goal, and really try to systemize what we're doing, because it was just kind of like lead comes in, somebody calls it at some point. Like there wasn't really it wasn't a business. It wasn't work. It was just Anyways, so we decided, hey, let's build a sales process. Let's have credibility packets. Let's go on appointments. So we just fully invested our time and our efforts into it. And then since I became a decent salesman in that time frame, they're like, hey, we'll just have you run the whole acquisitions piece. Because me and Brad were kind of tag teaming in the early stages. So we'll give all of that. You just worry about all that, handle all the lead flow, handle all the negotiations, the contracts. Over time, I got more involved in the flip management, in the retail process, in the business in general, in the marketing. I'm very obsessive. I'm very my mom used to tell me I'm a dog on a bone, right? Anything that I am interested in, I just want to know everything about. So that's kind of what happened with us over time. Slowly permeated myself throughout the business. Built up a lot of good skills that way. Built up a lot of versatility, and we had a good run, fun run.
So this is 9 or 10 months after you got your first deal, or this was 9 or 10 months in? Okay.
This is 9 or 10 months. This was right when that first deal happened is when we decided we
Oh,
were gonna, because that was the first one that I had negotiated, and I got them down a decent amount, right?
yep, got it.
So they were kind of like, oh, okay, maybe Hayden can be a good salesman, and that's kind of what
Sure.
spurred all that. And I'm like, yeah, guys, I think I can. I've been selling insurance.
Right, right.
So yeah, we like fully set it up. I went to John Martinez training, which is a real estate sales coach,
Yep.
that summer, shortly after that deal happened. And when I got back, man, it was like gangbusters. We were, 3, 4 lockups a month, consistently from that point.
Wow.
And I think a part of that was the sales coaching, but part of me also thinks that I just know the tenacity that I was attacking it with from that point. And it was a different ball game for me after I kind of could prove that it was possible, and I could do it.
Yeah. So you said at some point you started moving away from direct mail. At what point was that?
Mm-hmm. So remember Lead Sherpa?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever? Yeah,
I
Lead
never used
Sherpa.
them, but I mean, I
So,
remember.
yeah, they were like the flagship SMS blast service,
Hmm.
and I think they started in 2018 or 2017. Um, we joined a mastermind after that first year of business. My
Okay.
partner did, Brad, and his twin, and they would bring me along to those things. And yeah, we just kept hearing about people doing these text campaigns on Lead Sherpa, and that we heard that it was very effective, in terms of just marketing dollars. You could hit a lot more people with much less money.
Sure.
So we elected to start doing that, and that really became our bread and butter from mid 2018, mid to late 2018, all the way until like 2020. The
Okay.
majority of our deals were coming from SMS. Um,
Gotcha.
uh, Eventually left Lead Sherpa. Launch Control came out in 2019, I believe. And
Hmm.
Launch Control, we were a part of like probably the first 50 users. I want to say it was fairly
Wow.
beta when we started using it, but yeah, we were slightly ahead of the curve in terms of like text marketing. But as with
Sure.
any form of marketing, it's only good in the beginning, and then over time it gets worse. And you've got to
Sure.
pivot, or you've got to have multiple different types out there.
Yep.
So yeah, SMS was awesome while it lasted.
And same sales process. You're still, going in person to appointments at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sales process was kind of three pronged. So we had the lead generator
Yep.
who would, which this is for outbound strategy. So obviously, direct mail is an entirely different process. It's inbound calls,
Hmm.
filtering out who's motivated. It's simpler of a process, really.
Sure.
But if you're doing outbound, you have somebody who is generating the interest. In our business, we had somebody that had been in real estate for a while and was familiar with what motivation looks like. Call those
Okay.
leads and qualify them, and then set the appointment for me. So it was really a generator, a qualifier, and an appointment setter, and then an in-person appointment that I would go on.
And in-person closer. Gotcha.
Yep.
And so you're hitting the SMS marketing, right? You're getting up to 3 or 4 deals a month, which is nothing to sneeze at. Are you flipping all of these at this point, or are you starting to wholesale some, or selling to some institutions?
Yeah. So my partner and myself included. Sorry.
I think it broke up a little bit. I said
Yeah.
you were wholesaling or flipping these all. You're flipping them all, or you decided to wholesale some of them at this point?
Yeah. So we hated the idea of wholesaling initially. It seemed slimy to us. It seemed we were flippers, man. We're gonna close. We've got cash. There was kind of this level of like morality to it, where it's like I don't want to tell a seller that I'm the buyer and not be the buyer. What we didn't really know, and what was what our perspectives changed on over time is that you don't have to lie to the seller. You can do it in an honest way,
Sure.
and that's ultimately how we began to wholesale eventually. But we would, I mean, we made feeble attempts to wholesale if we decided we didn't want to buy something. Ultimately, we had a lot of situations where we'd get a week from close and finally get an inspection done and have second thoughts about closing it. So I would, call, Pat Flynn or a few other big buyers that I knew in town just to see if they would take it, but nothing uh, kind of for real in terms of efforts to wholesale.
Yeah.
We'd ultimately either take it down and flip it ourselves, or we would take it down and then just relist it as is. So that's called like
Sure.
wholetailing.
Yeah.
So we really kind of just did that, and
Yeah.
then we would try. I think we might have wholesaled one or two
Hmm.
in that time frame, but just the people we really knew and trusted, that the deal wouldn't go south with.
Sure.
But yeah, it wasn't until coming out of COVID that we really decided, hey, let's figure out wholesale,
Yeah.
and that like just that decision and committing to that like doubled our volume, because you're buying for yourself. There's so many things that you're saying no to,
Yeah.
that fits other people's model. But I wasn't putting myself out there. I wasn't talking to buyers. I didn't know the varying exit strategies that were out there. So it's either we want it or we don't.
Yeah.
And then yeah, kind of after we started wholesaling, and I realized like how much juice you could squeeze out of the orange in terms of marketing budget. I'm like, this is stupid. Why did we ever not do this?
Right.
But hindsight 2020.
Sure. We'll talk about that shift in your sales process, right? Like you said that you don't have to tell, you don't have to lie to the seller. I know a lot of people wholesale and they're telling the seller that the buyer 100%, and then they kind of obviously feel like that might be a little bit dishonest. Like how did you shift that? Like what did that conversation look like now
Yeah.
with your sellers compared to when you were only flipping?
Yeah. Well, and what I realized that the conversation didn't have to change that much, because I was still, even at this time, 19, 20, I was a little twerp. I'm still a twerp. Let's not be getting out of hand here.
You got a beard now
But
though, so it's okay.
yeah, right, it hides it. But no, what I didn't realize is that when we were flipping, I was doing the same thing as when we were wholesaling. I was telling sellers, "Hey, I'm not really the decision maker. My boss is. This is what
Yep.
he's telling me works. This my partner thinks works, so this is what we can do." And then with wholesaling, it's the same conversation. Hey, ultimately, and it was easy for me to make this shift because I was already young and having to face those kind of objections when we were
Right.
flipping and actually buying stuff.
Yeah.
So, like, I created it to be this huge, like, crazy change, and in reality, it really wasn't. It was all the same stuff with just a different meaning, really. And so, same conversation. Hey, I work with partners. They're the ones who buy the deals. I'm not fooling anybody. I'm a child, right? Look at dumb old Hayden. Ha ha ha. He's not buying anything, right? And you just play into that, and people trust you more for coming out and saying that and being honest about it, right? Like
Yeah.
literally, I'm not fooling anybody. I'm young.
Yeah.
There's no way I have $1 million sitting around to just go buy 5 houses today, right? So
Sure.
like
Yeah.
that makes people comfortable, and it's ultimately what gets contracts is comfort.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I mean, the only difference is that I would have to prep sellers. Hey, we're going to do a full blown house inspection, right? And what changed is, hey, I've got a whole team that I work with. I've got realtors that list them. I've got rehab crews that do the projects. I have cash lenders that fund the deals. All of these people have to stamp approval on this for me to move forward at this price.
Yeah.
And what was maybe different about the way that we wholesaled in the beginning was we would also offer them what we would actually buy at without doing any of that stuff. No showings, quick close, whatever. So I would say if you give me time to get my scope down to the penny as low as it can go, if you give my realtor as much time as possible to see how the market's going to head, and you give me as much time as possible to find a lender at the cheapest cost as possible, then I'm able to pay the most that way. But if I
Hmm.
can't do any of those things, then I have to pay this price. And it explains why you have to do showings. It explains why all of these people have to come in and out of the house.
Yeah.
So that was really the one tweak. But if you explain it in the right way, it's not a hard sell.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And then you said you used to do it that way, so you shifted. Is that because you went to the whole wholesale route? Is that why, or because you went to 100% wholesale?
Yeah, no, I mean, that was how our sales process worked. And when we were wholesaling, because we were also flipping some stuff here and there, so we didn't want to like
Got
pigeonhole that business by wholesaling.
Sure, sure.
And ultimately, you'd be surprised on how many people will take the guaranteed quick money that there's no strings attached. Sometimes you make more money that way. So,
Yeah,
not something we do at Cash Geeks. We process too many leads, and to realistically have that much cash on tap to make those types of deals. But there's still a similar process where price and timeline, there's a relationship there. The less
of
time, the
course.
lower the price. That type of lingo is very much still alive.
Sure. Give me flexibility, and I can pay you more.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Yep. Yep.
And at what point did you start? Did you discover, or did you start working with hedge funds and institutional buyers?
Yeah. So we discovered them pretty early on. We didn't do a lot of business with them
Okay.
until right around 2019.
Okay.
2019, end of 2018. We got our feet wet, but by no means we're doing a ton of business in that realm. Really what happened is we just out of curiosity, we started seeing these like crazy entities buying full cash when we were running comps
Mhm.
and stuff. Like what? And then we like look into property records and we're like, what? This entity owns 1,000 houses in Jacksonville. What is happening? They're paying full value. This doesn't make sense. Is this an
Mhm.
investor? That's not how they behave. It was like an intrigue was starting to grow starting in like 2018, which is around the same time Open Door and OfferPad came out.
Mhm.
Or no, they came out way earlier than that, but in terms of the Jacksonville market.
Sure.
Um, and so I guess I look at it as like when I was at my most impressionable years in my career in real estate, the hottest topic was iBuyers and hedge funds because it was
Mhm.
this fringe thing that was new to the space that nobody really knew a lot about. And that was fascinating to me because I know in business, you either cheat, you're first, or you do something better. So not going to
Where'd you get
cheat.
that from? What movie is that from?
That's from Margin. Or is it Margin Call? I think it's Margin Call. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Talk to
I
me
don't
like
think
I'm
it.
Goldberg or Hayden.
I'm not going to cheat. At this point in my career, I'm probably not going to do something better. So I just have to do something first. So that I kept that in the back of my head for like years. I'm like, if I could figure out how to monetize this like knowledge that I have of what hedge funds are, how they operate, how they buy, and I can do that first, I could stand a chance to be in a really good position.
Yeah.
And got my feet wet and just looking at spreadsheets, pulling lists, trying
Mhm.
to find patterns, trying to identify who was who. I started doing that as early as 2018. Um, in terms of like deep implementation, though, it wasn't
Mhm.
until coming out of COVID.
Okay.
So we would flip houses, had listed inventory here and there. We would sell some of that listed inventory to hedge funds.
Yeah.
We wholetailed a deal to a hedge fund. Um, so we started to get our feet wet. We started to put ourselves out there and get affiliated with how they work with investors. And at the time, there was a ton of roadblocks. They
Okay.
would make you own a house for like 30 days before they'd buy it off of you.
Mhm.
There was a high barrier of entry um,
Sure.
in terms of flippers or wholesalers. So really, all of the brakes were pulled off coming out of COVID because we were sent into an inventory crisis at the same time interest rates were as cheap as they'd ever been. And
Yeah.
so a lot of major financial institutions raised unbelievable amounts of money, and there was no houses for them to buy with that money.
Yeah.
So they started reaching out to all the fringe players like ourselves and They're like, hey, we'll do assignments, we'll do double closes. It doesn't matter, like anything you got. So I
Really?
was lucky. I had done maybe 8 or so transactions. Maybe it's hard for me to say. It's been a little while now, but we had
Yep.
done a little bit of business with a few of these funds
Yep.
coming into COVID. So we kind of knew what to expect in terms of the process
Yep.
and how they work.
But
Coming
those
out
eight,
of COVID, yeah.
those eight were just stuff you had
Sorry.
listed and they made you an offer on. Like you weren't dealing directly with them until
No,
coming
we
out of
were.
COVID.
Yeah,
Oh, you were.
we did deal directly on maybe a quarter of those transactions, if not
Okay.
half, somewhere in there. Yeah,
Got it. Had you just reached
but it
out
didn't
to them,
really.
or did they reach out to you because they had bought some of your listed stuff, or you just, how did that come about, the direct relationship?
Yeah, we. So it was Brad, really. So I had figured out a way to kind of labyrinthed together, like, okay, so this house is bought and then it's handed to this property management company, and then
Hmm.
for a different, it would vary per hedge fund how to get a hold of thed people. And then
Sure.
for, sometimes it was calling the property management company and it's like, hey, when you guys onboard a new house for rent, who do you talk to? And then just get that guy's contact number and then just go from there.
Okay.
um, a lot of them, you'll see commonalities in mailing address. So you might see 5 or 10 different entities out there that own a bunch of houses, but they all got the same mailing address. Well, then
Hmm.
you can use that mailing address to try to find a place of business, to then try to find a business phone number, and then uh, you know, it's not that hard to find out who these people are. It just takes a lot of persistence to get them to take you seriously, because these people own like hundreds of thousands of houses. So rightfully so, they're not going to want to talk to some Joe Blow wholesaler.
Yep.
We have a story, actually. We have one hedge fund that it took a year and a half and over 250. We would send every deal to this hedge fund because they wouldn't respond to us, right? It took us a year and a half and 250 deals being sent with no response to the same rep at the same email for them to finally do business with us, right? So it's not that hard to find out who these people are. It's really hard to get in with them and to start transacting. But we just
Yeah.
started doing that. My partner Brad found through a property manager, and then he found a direct line tracking down mailing addresses, and we had 3 or 4 hedge funds identified that we had direct contact with.
Yep.
And yeah, we leverage those connections to wholesale, hedge fund inventory coming out of COVID.
So you kind of shift your model to all hedge fund at that point, or just were you
Nope.
still flipping houses, or what was happening there?
Yeah, we didn't. I think we started buying again in like July or August once it kind of blew over and we realized the sky wasn't falling.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't remember entirely. I just remember us starting to do a ton of wholesale deals starting in like June of 2020. And I was doing about half of the dispo work, I would say.
Okay.
So I was onboarding and then offboarding. There was days where it would be I'm on the phone with a seller, I'm on the phone with a buyer, seller, buyer, like all day long. Um, I remember us doing maybe a quarter of our inventory in that time frame going to hedge funds. We didn't have like a centralized campaign on that inventory. It was just kind of a happy birthday if it came up in the leads. It wasn't until I broke off on my own that I was like, let me figure out how to refine the exact hedge fund buy box and just go after this type of inventory, which is kind of what Cash Geeks took from our relationship, and that's kind of what we do today.
Got it. So what around what time did you decide to break off on your own and make your focus hedge funds?
Yeah, so it was September or October of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then were you still doing stuff on your own at that point, or was that kind of when you came in to work with Cash Geeks?
No, so I wholesaled from September to around February of 2021. So it
Okay.
was about a 8 or 9 month stint.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a funny story. So me and Gonzalo had become good friends up to this point. I
Sure.
met him in 2019 or something like that.
Yeah.
He'd had me over for Thanksgiving and all sorts of stuff, right? So we had a close relationship, and
Yeah.
I started this kind of model where I'm going to target the exact buy box of a hedge fund, and
Mhm.
I'm going to wholesale the properties, and it went really really well. So I ended up like so basically what happened was I was locking down almost the same amount of contracts that I was with my previous business partners, but now
Yep.
I'm totally on my own.
Yep.
So I had the same sales acumen, I had the same ability to close a lead. I was garbage at transactions. I was not great at dispo, which with hedge funds is like its whole own sensitive topic. Um, and so what happened was it went really good, and I started just fumbling transactions because I was so caught up in the sales piece. I was so caught up in getting that next deal under contract that I was foregoing what was already in the pipeline, already
Yeah.
under contract, already going to close. And
Yep.
what happened was I actually got blacklisted by a hedge fund because I didn't respond to a title email for like 3 4 days. So I call Gonzalo. I'm like, dude, I'm in way over my head. I have deals that are set to close that there's spreads on that I like need help closing, and I don't have time to hire people. I don't like. I was just helpless, kind of. I was just
Sure.
overwhelmed, and so he's like, I'm coming to your house tomorrow morning. Like, okay. So Gonzalo showed up
I like it.
at the house, and he gave me kind of a dad talk, man. He kind of was just like, "You're screwing up. You're being an idiot. You're never going to like you're going to be successful in the short term doing this, but in 2 years you're going to be worse off. Like you can do more with a high level of people around you."
Sure.
And he expressed that he wanted to attempt to instill a little hedge fund arm in Cash Geeks, and that I could essentially merge my pipeline and my business with his, and he'd take everything over that I was struggling with and pulling my hair out over.
Yep.
And we basically, in the beginning, it was just like, here's our dead leads. See if you can pull a couple hedge fund deals out.
Hmm.
And yeah, we pulled out like four in a week or two of going through their dead leads.
Jeez.
So it became over time a bigger part of the business model of Cash Geeks. I was kind of the guinea pig before Cash Geeks that was like, hey, this is a real model, it will work.
Yeah.
And then we kind of puzzle piece that in with what they already had going.
Yeah. So talk about that transition, right? Because I remember I don't remember how long it was over the course of, but there was a point um, where Cash Geeks transitioned to almost an exclusively hedge fund model. I don't know
Mhm.
how long that time took, but talk about what transition that looked like over what time period.
Yeah, so by July of 2021, we were a full blown, no, before then, June of 2021,
Okay.
we were a full blown hedge fund acquisitions company. I showed up in around February of that year, so it took us about 5 months to shift.
Okay.
In those 5 months, the biggest issue is that for us to get very refined in what the buy box was, and with the amount of capacity we had for lead gen and the amount of salespeople we had,
Yeah.
we needed a lot more than just Jacksonville to keep people busy.
Okay.
So Cash Geeks had previously gone into Tampa and San Antonio at a wholesale level and had a horrible experience. And when
Yeah.
I showed up in February of 21, they had just pulled out of those two markets and were like, we're never going to do that again. We want to just get deep in Jacksonville. So that was the mindset when I showed
Remember
up,
that.
right? So we do like 4 or 5 months worth of deals and it's working well. But we realize if we really want to go after the hedge fund stuff, we have to get honed in on it. And there's just not enough data in Jacksonville to
Sure.
to keep people busy. So we had to go into outside markets, and that was one of the biggest challenges with that model. We had to go into Charlotte, Atlanta, Tampa, Orlando, Memphis, Birmingham, Nashville. we had to go everywhere to be able to keep our guys busy. And we had to change a lot on how we pulled our data as the month, even past June. It's constant iterations with how we would decide what to market to and what not. But yeah,
Talk
by
about
then,
that. Like what
yeah,
kind of iterations? Like because the hedge funds were changing their buy boxes constantly, or because like what?
yeah. So initially it was X hedge fund says they buy in this county and
Okay.
they buy this type of house in X county. Well, what I started doing, I had tracked kind of the labyrinth of how these hedge funds operate. I knew what their acquisition entity was. I knew what their stabilization entity was. I know what their securitization entity was. So I could
Okay.
tell what the fresh acquisitions were and what the holds were. And what I cared about is where are they buying fresh acquisitions?
Yeah.
And we found that we were more successful isolating to a zip code level where these hedge funds were active in the past 60 days. And we would refine the areas that we would target at a marketing level based on, um, were there more than two buys from hedge funds in the past 60 days in this zip code? And if there were, then we'd market in that zip code. If there was not, we would not market in that zip code. So if you looked at like a geographical view of how we marketed, it would
Yeah.
be like Atlanta and then just these little areas in Atlanta, and then Memphis, these little areas in Memphis, and Jacksonville, these little areas. And then every 30 days, it's going to shift depending on where the hedge funds are indicating they want to buy more properties in. But in addition to that, it's also fact checking what they're telling you their buy box is. So we want to
That's
look at all the houses that they buy, and we want to look and see, okay, they say they buy down to 1950, but how many houses in reality did they buy in the years of 1950 to 1960? And how many did they buy from 70 to 80? And how many did
yeah.
they buy from 80 to 90? So on and so forth. And what you
Yeah.
can start to piece together is like, it's not a linear relationship between like, we'll buy every house equally. That's not the reality. The
Sure.
reality is that they target particular assets, and each hedge fund are aware of what assets they perform best in, and they try to find their own little niche. So you got to know what type of asset you're working with, what hedge fund fits the bill in terms of their strategy,
Yep.
and you have to dance around the country in the areas that they are or are not. And that's the best way to be successful with it, because ultimately these hedge funds are balancing a portfolio. So you
Mm,
can't just do it in one city.
sure.
Um, they have to balance a portfolio geographically. So they might buy a ton in Memphis, and now they got to balance it with Atlanta, and now they got to balance it with Jacksonville. So it's a constant rotation, and you can't predict. Like we've tried
Yeah.
that piece, where we've tried to predict, hey, where are they going to go on a buying spree? There's really no way.
Yeah.
The best thing you can do is just cast a pretty broad net in all the areas that they might want to buy aggressive in, and then ultimately it kind of evens out. You have some markets that perform like trash, and you have some that are really hot in small
Yeah.
spurts.
So you're looking at backwards, 60 days backwards performing data by zip code and saying, ooh, even though they say they may buy in this zip code, it's in their buy box, but they're not actually really transacting there, or they're not transacting there for 1970 homes. They're only transacting there for 1990 homes or 2000
Yes,
built homes. Very
yes,
interesting.
precisely. Yep.
Sounds like a
Yeah.
lot of data gathering.
Oh, it's insane, man. When we would pull our marketing data, we have a data VA that would have to go make individual list pulls per zip code, and sometimes that would take 3 full work days of just pulling the criteria per
Yeah.
zip at a national level. So yeah, it's cumbersome for sure.
So you guys start kind of figuring out this hedge fund model. You're marketing exclusively to that by June, or you're still doing a little bit of Jacksonville traditional wholesale?
Only so if you bought any wholesale inventory from us starting in like June of 2021 all the way until January of the following year, that was all through JV deals. We were not marketing at all
Yeah.
to wholesale deals. So yes, I mean we still had wholesale inventory, but it wasn't ours.
Right.
We were selling it for other people.
Got it.
an interesting effect that happened is we had built up this healthy buyers list for specific types of property that we were no longer selling people. And people started kind of overpaying just based on the fact that we didn't have as much inventory that we used to. So I remember we JV'd quite a few deals in that time
We
frame,
did
Mike. I remember that. So that
quite
kind
a
of
few
created,
toppling over houses.
yeah, yeah. uh,
I actually went by one of those about a month ago.
oh
It was
yeah,
re it was rehabbed. It looked good. I mean, we sold it for 34 grand. I mean, there's money in
yeah.
that for someone who wanted to deal with that.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder how much they spent on main beams, but
A lot, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah.
It's sitting up straight now, though. Straighten up.
So good.
So I remember a while back you told me on the hedge fund side, like you were getting really deep into it, right? I mean, you were even looking at like you guys are wanting to make sure that whoever you were selling these deals to, once you had it under contract, was actually gonna move forward with the deal, and you were
Yeah,
even looking through securitization stuff, I think, or
yeah,
bond offerings. Can you talk more about
yeah.
that?
Yeah. So over time, obviously, I'm super enthused with this whole business model of owning hundreds of thousands of houses in the U.S. and that just being something that can happen. So I'm sinking my teeth into it. We go to conferences in which a lot of these institutions go to. I was
Sure.
lucky enough to have both an investment banker explain how this works to me, and then I also met an asset manager for one of the largest hedge funds in America,
Okay.
and she actually was able to explain a lot of this stuff to me as well. So that's kind of where this all comes from, and then I was put on to what places to look for in terms of bond market data. So to be honest, like, this is a tangent. I could talk literally 2 hours on this piece, and I'm going to try to dumb it down as much as possible. But essentially, in 2014, this lovely financial tool was invented called a commercial mortgage-backed security backed by single-family rentals. So
Mhm.
this is a product that has existed in times past, but it's never been applied to um, an institutional investor owning a rental home or
Sure.
homes plural.
Yep.
So essentially how the bond market functions within a hedge fund's business model is it's essentially their way of refinancing properties.
Mhm.
So, and the reason they do this over like a commercial mortgage refinance is that there's zero regulation on what LTV it needs to be at. There's zero regulation on the interest rate and how it follows the Fed rate. There's no requirements of liquidity. There's no requirements for down payment, nothing like that. So it's like a pretty much a completely unregulated way for the biggest financial institutions in America to be able to exit their debt to
Yep.
then reallocate their capital, right? So it's essentially like, if you're familiar with the Burr concept, it's like that, but at the largest scale that you could imagine, right?
And with very few rules.
With very few rules, right? So the bond market is a leading indicator of what hedge funds buying behavior is going to be and how much funding they have. And you can, what we started doing is tracking who exits bonds.
Hmm.
Typically, when you exit a bond, you see a huge influx of capital that you need to reallocate by a certain time frame. So usually, when somebody sells a bond, there's a nice little buying spree after that,
Yep.
unless of course they get skinned alive on said bond. And I'll give you an example.
Yeah. Tell
A
me.
lot of us, a lot of us were selling houses to Tiber Capital in
Yep.
2021.
Yep.
Now, Tiber Capital was a subsidiary of another hedge fund called Starwood, which is an international real estate investment hedge fund, essentially.
Okay.
And they ended up getting in a lawsuit in Israel, actually, for selling a corporate bond backed by some retail space, like massive
Okay.
storefront, stuff like that. They had
Sure.
essentially sold a faulty bond. Tiber was being backed by the same company that got drug into this huge lawsuit. Another thing is kind of at play here because when hedge funds get into the game and they want to securitize, their goal is to sell bonds to renew their capital and turn a business out of just acquiring houses.
Yep.
When they do that, they have to come up with like a cap rate or a yield that they're willing to buy at. And essentially, what they're looking at is what is my spread between what the bond market will yield me in terms of a coupon rate, which is basically just an interest rate. So let's
Yep.
say I could sell a bond for 5% yield
Okay.
to a pension fund. And let's say I go buy a bunch of real estate that are 7% yield. So I see
Hmm.
I have 2% spread there as just the
Yep.
intermediate. You see what I mean?
Yep. Make a spread. Yep.
So, yep, yep. So what happened with Tiber is as the economy got a little more shaky, there's also another level to how those interest rates are depicted. So if you have a bond full of Class A properties that are newer, that need less work, you get a higher credit rating. You get like a AAA rating, and
Sure.
you'll get a cheaper interest rate or bond coupon rate
Sure.
the higher credit score you get. Well, Tiber was buying a bunch of 1950 crap boxes that needed huge rehabs. And they were like the only hedge fund in that space doing that. So every wholesaler under the sun was slinging as many deals to them as possible. And what ended up happening was they couldn't exit their bond fast enough because they had all these houses with rehabs. So their turnaround time from buying those houses and then stabilizing that portfolio was way longer than any other hedge fund. So
Hmm.
they can't stabilize it fast enough, right? The
Yep.
economy starts to turn. People want to invest in real estate still because they're worried about inflation, but they want AAA rated real estate. So if anybody was playing in the hedge fund space in the spring of last year, you might have noticed a lot of hedge funds said, "Hey, we want to buy 1990 and up. We want to buy 1980 and up. We want to buy 1995 and up." The reason that was happening is that anybody who was selling a bond that wasn't a AAA rated bond was getting skinned alive on their interest rate or their coupon rate when they would
Yep.
go and sell that bond on the open market. So everybody,
Because the investors buying that bond felt that it was higher risk, so they wanted a bigger return.
correct,
Is that why?
correct, and it did, the yields didn't make sense. So Tiber, I want to say I could be wrong. I think it was just one bond they sold. It could have been two. But here's a new hedge fund who doesn't really know how it works. They've never gone through an exit before. They buy a group of houses that are higher risk, and their yields were like 7%. I think they ended up securitizing at like 6.5, but I don't think they came out ahead in terms of LTV. So that led them to stop buying for the year. In fact, they've never bought since then. Whether that be because of the lawsuit of the faulty bond they sold before, or it's because of this current bond. Um, some of those reps ended up reaching out to us to sell portions of that bond package for them, which was a very interesting experience.
Portions of that bond package, like houses or like,
Mhm. Yep. So the way that the language is written, if the bond starts to collapse on itself, essentially it's not making the homes aren't making the payments back to the coupon holders.
yep,
There's language in there where certain portions of that bond will be sold off to recoup the cash value that's necessary to maintain operating capital and cash flow within that bond. So if you run too low on cash and your stuff's not cash flowing, then there's certain clauses that trigger certain amounts of homes to be sold to then try to retain the bond. So I know the bond hasn't fully gone under or anything like that, but I do know they've had to sell off assets out of it to keep it
right.
afloat.
Um, so you're looking at this information, right? All these bond offerings and all this, and are you making decisions of who you're going to send deals to, or who you're going to, if you get a couple offers, who you think is going to close because you're concerned that
Yeah,
if someone's bond didn't go well, they may not close, or talk more about
yeah,
that.
yeah. So it really means a lot because most of the time with hedge fund deals, you get one shot at selling that to one fund, and if you
Why
choose the
why
wrong
why
one,
is why is that for people who don't
because
know?
typically, so sellers that own houses that are nicer assets that we're trying to target for hedge funds, they're typically not in as much distress. They typically need much less favorable terms than, say, a motivated seller.
Yeah.
So the game in hedge fund deals is really less about price than it is about terms, because you need time to go get bids. You need time to get inspections done. If I have 10 days of inspection period, I only have one offer I can accept. And if that offer
Mm,
doesn't pan, I'm screwed, right?
yeah.
So it's really important, and this might be trending out since the market's softening a little bit. We might be able to get easier terms, but I know in the
Mhm.
past 6 months, it's been the difference between making money or not. Because
Wow.
if you're taking the offer, like really, it's like, okay, we have three offers. They're within 5 grand of each other, right? How do we decide which hedge fund to take? Well, there's two things.
Yep.
One, what happened last week? What post inspection bids did we get last week from these hedge funds? How much lower or higher or same were they? Were they stable last week? Were they crazy last week? Were they all over the board? So we kind
Sure.
of do a quick look back and just see on the day to day how they've been performing. And then we'll also take into consideration, hey, they haven't sold a bond for 7 months. They're at the tail end of their funding.
Mm,
So we could get axed depending on how many commitments they have out right now.
yeah.
Versus, hey, they just sold a bond last month. They made us a good offer. They didn't retrade us that hard on the last deal. I feel really good about taking this offer.
Yeah.
So there's a lot at play there. Ultimately, a lot of it comes down to gut feel and
Sure.
just day to day experience. But it has made a difference in our business.
Yeah. And and when they cancel, I mean, they're often within their inspection period, right? So you're not even retaining any kind of EMD from them. It's a wash,
Yeah,
and there goes
it's
your
a wash.
profit, whatever you were gonna make. Oh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is the nature of hedge fund deals, man. It takes loading a lot in the hopper to get a lot out at a smaller scale because of how much unpredictability there is with it. It's just law of large numbers is really the best way you can overcome something like that. And while we've gotten as inventive and as smart about it as we can, we're dealing with, for the most part, a lot of private hedge funds
mm-hmm.
that can do whatever they want at any
Sure.
time, and you have to know that, and you have to be okay with that because they're opportunistic like everybody else.
Yeah.
They don't owe anything to you. They're there to get a deal,
Yeah.
and it's awesome when their definition of a deal sucks, and it sucks when their definition of a deal is a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you mentioned actually kind of the seller profile is a little different for a lot of these deals that you're doing. I mean, typical wholesale, at least in my experience, with a lot of the deals we do, it's often heavy distress. There's needs, there's a lot of terms that the seller needs, whether that's stay after closing, whether that's they need help moving, whether they just don't care about this property anymore. There's code violations, title issues, all that kind of stuff. But it seems like that profile is different when you guys are
yeah,
going after this kind of inventory.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a higher intelligence seller. It's somebody who's got a house that's worth a decent amount of money, 300,000, 400,000 sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, their motivation is they don't want to deal with realtors most of the time, and
Mm,
we can be competitive to what they would net with all those fees. At least back in the day, we could. Now it's a
yeah,
little different, but still, people will take a deal based on convenience. But
sure.
the language in your contract becomes to be a lot more important.
Mm,
Using standardized state contracts is what we had to start doing. We had to use FAR bars in Florida. We had to go find the
really?
GAR for Georgia. Yeah, yeah, because
Oh,
the intellect level of seller that owns those types of assets, you can't have your Word doc as is contract with every liberty under the sun in it. Like, these people know what they're doing.
yeah.
Uh,
Can't
so
have your
we had to,
one pager.
yeah, right, yeah, no one pagers. Obviously, there's still times in which that's fine, but
Yeah,
by and large, it's a much more honest. It has to be a much more honest sales process. Hey,
yeah,
we buy for, we're acquiring this for a fund that we work with. They have their own inspection that they do, whatever. Um, yeah, so I mean, it is a different process for sure. And yeah, typically you have worse terms. Closing time frames got to be faster. People will talk to their realtor friend. You don't need 15 days of inspection period. That doesn't even make sense. You get more pushback on those types of things with that type of seller.
Sure. Um, yeah, talk about that sales process, right? It's different. I mean, how does that sales process differ outside of just, obviously they're a little more picky about the contract terms and all
Yeah.
that, and it's more of a convenient seller. Like, how is
hmm
I don't want to say the pitch because I don't really like the word pitch, but how is the conversation different?
Then say just a hardcore wholesale list with tons of distress on it.
Yeah, than a foreclosure list or,
Yeah, I mean, it takes more selling, to be honest. When you are working a motivated list, uh, you kind of want to find the person who's going to qualify themselves, and you can almost be more of a confidant, and just they'll give you information a lot easier. You'll know exactly their pain points. Like it's almost an easier sales process in that regard.
Mhm.
With the hedge fund style leads, first off, you get a way higher response rate because a lot more people are willing to sell in the ranges that you can offer. So you're
Sure.
dealing with a lot more tire kickers and a lot more interested leads in general, just purely based off the pricing, right? and
Okay.
and it's a lot more salesy because it's not you can't go and pull that motivation out. You can't have them give you the full roadmap on how they need to be closed and what they care about.
Mm,
They
okay.
A lot of times they're doing it because it makes sense for them. So it's hard when it's not as you and I know it. Like,
Yeah.
my uncle's in this house, there's a squatter in there, my tenant's not paying me. It's none of those things. It's like, hey, if you can pay this price and you can do it by this time, I would do it. But if
Yeah.
it's not this price, I don't really need to, so I'm not. So
Yeah.
the sales process turned into much more of like almost aggressive sales to get those types of sellers because you have to create your own
Mm,
motivation. If there is no motivation there, you got to create your own urgency. However
yeah.
you do that. So in some essences, I think it made our sales team a lot better
Yeah.
because you have to get scrappier over contracts, and you're also getting scrappy against people who are pretty smart. So
Sure.
it takes, iron sharpens iron, right? So
Yeah.
now that we are kind of cutting our hedge fund lead flow with wholesale lead flow, it's
Yeah.
very much noticeable. Like, wow, we got a lot better by working these hedge fund leads.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
potency is there. Yeah.
So yeah, these people they're convenience sellers, right? And how do you guys compete though against when you're targeting that hedge fund inventory, how do you compete against the iBuyer? The open door, the offer pad, the sounds like a
Fees,
very similar process. Okay.
fees, fees. What we offer you, you net. So that's the biggest difference between commissions, acquisition fees, whatever. Um, and it's not necessarily that sellers don't like the offers after you calculate the net. It's like those offers are still good. It's that sellers would feel that it was grimy, that
Hmm.
they would get an offer for X amount and then they'd look into it and then it would be this amount. So we would just play into that. If anybody ever tried to pit an iBuyer against us, it's like, well, they told you they were going to offer you that. Go look again. Go and see what that true net is. No, go through the process. I want you to.
Yeah,
Uh,
get your inspection back from them.
right.
Get
And
your
we
final statement.
Yeah, and we might not be able to pay as much as they are, but our whole thing was, I'm a real person. I'm on the phone with you now, and this is the price that can be paid. And there's no hidden fees. That's the net. There's no real estate commissions. This is it.
Yeah.
And for whatever, this is a strategy that works really well in the South, and I think it's because people are a lot more sensitive to getting screwed. But
Yeah.
if anybody has any inkling that there's any funny business, they just stay away. So we would just educate sellers on how those fees and open door and the iBuyers would work. And you don't win them all. Obviously, they're making good offers, but we can stay competitive against them.
Yeah. And so you guys are being, yeah, so just kind of back to that conversation about, wholesalers from earlier saying that they're going to buy at a main transparent. This sounds like almost same idea, right? You're like, we acquire,
Mhm.
you say we acquire for institutional buyers, or and they need to do inspection, or how does that conversation look?
Yeah, I mean, well, it varies. So each sales guy kind of has their own spin that they like to put.
Sure.
Some say, "Hey, I work with a group of institutional investors that are looking to buy this type of home." Some will say just partners still. Um, and then say that, "Hey, my partner has their own, third party inspection that they do,"
Yeah.
things of that nature. So I mean, yeah, it varies. Any of them work. I don't. I honestly don't think it really matters. Sellers
Yeah.
ultimately care about their comfort level with you.
Yeah.
You're comfortable with what you're saying, then they're going to be comfortable with you. So whatever that is for you, comfort is all.
And as long as you're setting that expectation of having a third party inspection and
Yeah,
what the
that's
time frames
huge.
are and
Yeah,
all that.
you gotta set expectations very clearly.
And are all those kind of, I call them wholesale terms that you do, things like, hey, you can stay after closing. Hey, I'll help you move. Does that kind of go out the window with
Goes
this
out the
hedge fund
window.
type
Yeah, unless we're going to buy it and sit on it while we let people do a post occupancy or we let people move out, which has happened. I mean, there's deals where you're making enough money where it's like, yeah, fine, I'll rack up 10 grand
model?
in transactional charges and still make 40. So that'll happen quite a bit. Um, you know, we started getting really staunch probably around January of this last year or this year, 2022. We got really staunch on like tenants conveying. So we wanted everything vacant. We
Yeah.
actually sold multiple houses that we thought were vacant, and turns out there was people in them, and it was like a legal nightmare that we thankfully got out of. But kind of from that point forward, we're like, hey, we don't want to risk this at all.
Yeah.
They've just hard line, got to be vacant. If we got a deal and we know we got a deal, then we can bend on that. But if we're anywhere close to MAO or
Yeah.
max allowable offer, then we can't offer anything special. It's got to be
Sure.
exactly what the hedge fund terms are.
Right. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
not going to bend for something that's thin.
correct. Yes.
So you guys were 100% into that, and now you're not. Um,
Yeah, it's
so
staying fluid. It's staying fluid, kind of as we look at the data, as we feel the market. The reality is hedge funds aren't going anywhere. They're going to be here and they're going to be an
yeah.
incredibly big and viable buyer for probably another 15, 20 years.
Hmm.
In the same way that institutions bought up, 25% of commercial real estate from 1994 when the commercial mortgage-backed security was invented to 2010. We're experiencing the same thing in single family today
Yeah.
with the single family rental bond being released in 2014. So you got to ride the wave with them. You got to ride the rail with them. The good news is that we are proficient in a lot of areas of business, so we can pivot away from that. We can keep relationships, lower our inventory going in their direction, still see success. But it's really all about the absorption rate across all lines of business.
Sure.
So looking
What
at
does
the
that mean
ratio.
for people who don't know what absorb? Okay, you're about to get into it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's of how many houses do we put out to our buyers? How quickly are those houses being absorbed by our buyers or being bought?
Sure.
So, like for instance, 2 months ago, we probably have 80% of our inventory, which is at the time roughly around 40 transactions. So 80% of 40, whatever that is, probably 32, were all
Yep.
hedge fund transactions. Well, when the market itself shrinks, if volume is down altogether,
Sure.
then we're going to feel that even at the microest scale of our little company, right? So if 2 months ago, before there was a volume drop, I was able to offload 32 houses to hedge funds, then I might expect there to only be 22 that are able to be absorbed based
Yeah.
on my success and failure rate. So we're following kind of like, okay, we submitted X amount of deals and X were taken, and we're
Yeah.
kind of keeping track of like how many can we possibly pump, because we've already tried to just like get as many as possible, see what happens. Um, they're working with tighter constraints. A lot of these companies haven't sold a bond; they're holding the bag until rates go back down. They're in no position to buy for the next 3 to 6 months. Um, so being aware of all those things, it's like, okay, how do we get strategic with our marketing efforts to be able to identify There's this much purchasing power out there based on
Yep.
how many deals we submitted, how many were accepted, and how many were denied.
Yep.
And if we can refine our marketing to produce this amount of deals, then we can spend all of these efforts on wholesale, flips, whatever. We
Yep.
can cut our activities so they're as efficient as possible. So that's kind of what we look at now, and the same goes for um, like hood rentals, right? So there's a lower absorption rate of hood rentals nowadays. For the first
Yeah.
time since Cash Geeks has been in business, we have to
Yeah.
scale back our marketing for hood properties because the amount that we can get under contract is not equal to the amount that we can sell.
Yeah.
So it's finding that inventory that has the best absorption rate, and really that's flip inventory right now, either on a wholesale
Mhm.
level or with you buying. The most amount
Yeah.
of money is available for those types of properties.
Sure.
So you can pump a ton of volume at that type of property and it'll be absorbed. You can't do that in the hood right now. You can't really do that with hedge funds right now.
Yeah.
So refining that down, right?
Yeah. Steven just posted a comment. He was asking if you could talk about kind of how you underwrite hedge funds deals at the moment.
Yep. Yep. So we dropped our max offer at 78% of value minus repairs. We're seeing a
Minus,
trend of, yep, we're seeing a trend of somewhere around like 82% at the low end acquisitions price of value from the hedge fund to the highest end. I mean, we still are getting some 90% bids here and there.
yeah.
Very rare. Really, the median is like 84, 85% is what we expect.
And they're backing out
Um,
repairs as well on those estimates.
yes, they're backing out repairs. So we're looking at that. Obviously, we have to be very um, strict with the terms that we offer. So that's
Hmm.
a given. So you combine kind of the max rule with the terms.
Yep.
One thing that has changed recently is if there's any sort of inkling that it's somewhat questionable. So I kind of track what hedge funds buy, and I can kind of comp what we're underwriting to other hedge fund purchases. So if I have and I can look at how far it is. So like if I have a hedge fund comp more than like a half mile away, I'm starting to just say no on that stuff. If
Is it
if we
is it
have
is it no based on the price, right? And then is it just a lower price, or you just will say, well, I just need to buy it at a flip price only, or you won't even send it to a hedge fund even if you have it at a great price. Like, how do you look at that?
So I mean, we'll send it in every time. Like if it's our own inventory, we don't care. We'll send anything in. But I mainly work with other wholesalers who are trying to do hedge fund deals, and so I
Gotcha.
look at their inventory a little bit differently.
Sure.
I don't want to take gambles on other people's stuff. I want to
Sure.
be as concise as I possibly can. So we put a lot more underwriting efforts into those deals, which is mainly just me. And we talk about this gut feel thing, which is also kind of mainly just me. So it kind of works because I'm the one that's looking at all these numbers. I'm kind of getting the gut feel on which hedge funds are good and which ones aren't, and then at the same time, I'm able to convey that to partners.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it really comes down to density of purchasing. So if I see a healthy amount of buys, particularly in that subdivision, if there's no buys in that subdivision, I'm starting to say no.
Interesting.
So if I see, okay, yes, this is a viable asset. They've bought multiple houses in here. They're definitely likely to buy this one. That makes me feel good. Pricing is a big thing.
Sure.
Condition is a big thing. We're getting a little bit stricter on, what is good condition and what isn't. So,
Yeah.
I don't want to see any torn up carpets. I don't want to see any holes in the drywall.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
you just got to, we're getting so finicky.
Hmm.
And basically, if it's the perfect house that fits the perfect mold in the perfect neighborhood, make your max offer. Shoot, go up to 80% if you have to, if we're that confident. But
Yeah.
if it doesn't fit that exact mold, we're only 3% away from 75% of value. And if we can get even just a tad under 75, we don't have to bank on the hedge funds working out to be able to move that inventory. So if
Yeah.
I'm not feeling like fully, let's do it, a lot of the times it's like, well, you're almost there, so just make the offer that we can pivot to wholesale, worst case scenario, and then
Sure.
at least
Yeah.
at least we're kind of guaranteeing our success with that.
Yeah.
So kind of splitting those two groups, and then like still giving it a shot on the hedge fund stuff for the stuff that's fringe, but ultimately pricing it to where you can do other stuff with it. Worst case scenario.
Yeah. And so, I know I was talking to Will the other night when I saw him. So he said you guys are now about 25% hedge funds, 75%.
Mhm.
Is it just Jacksonville wholesale, or are you guys in other markets doing wholesale as well?
So yeah, just Jacksonville, just
Okay.
really, really deep in Jacksonville. We're gonna have we're in talks. We're in talks. We
Yeah.
will, depending on the time frame in which hedge funds pick up, or if they're dormant until the end of the first quarter of next year, we might have to throw in another wholesale market to keep everybody busy. It's a challenge that I want to take. I love Memphis. I love
Yeah.
low price markets out there. I've been doing a lot of research over the past years on. So at this time, we're just kind of going to see what happens going into
Yeah.
January. If January looks bad, then we're going to pick up another wholesale market. If it looks good, we're going to go back to the hedge fund thing.
Yeah. So talk about what you mentioned, a kind of absorption rate of like kind of that Jack's Hood, like, rental inventory, and how it seems
Mhm.
like the buyer pool has dropped off there. Can you talk about what you're seeing in different types of inventory in Jacksonville? Because that's super interesting to me. I mean, just seeing
Yeah.
where it's going in the market. I mean, I know I'm still buying stuff in the hood, obviously not at the same price that I was.
Mhm.
But I'm
Mhm.
curious to hear from you guys who are doing, 40 transactions a month, what you're seeing.
Yeah. So in the same way that, well, how do I put this properly? We were selling a lot of houses to turnkey providers in the hood
Sure.
specifically. They were
Okay.
like the top buyer. And what's good
Yep.
about that is that they've got a whole business built out of that. They need to buy houses.
Yep.
And so they're a very stable buyer for you to do business with as a wholesaler.
Yep.
Um, with lending changes and with interest rate changes, like a lot of people aren't thrilled at owning a top of the market asset in the hood with limited cash flow because interest rates came up.
Yeah.
Um, so the turnkey guys are taking it in the chin a little bit right now, and their offers probably dropped 20 to 30% of what they were even 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So, a lot of our hood properties didn't even make it to marketing because they would just get sold to VIPs, which a lot of those were, turnkey guys.
Yep.
Until rates come back, they're probably going to stay like that. So now we have to scrap together one-off mom and pop buyers,
Yeah.
which there's way less of those on the north side, say, than on the west side, or say in Arlington, right?
There's way less on the north side than on the west
Yeah.
side.
Yes. And then the other piece is that people are way more willing to lend in Arlington or the West Side. People don't really want to lend in the hood right now. People don't really want to buy in the hood. They can choose now. There's inventory. There's
Yeah.
opportunities out there. So people aren't handcuffed to the 75-70% rule anymore.
Sure.
They can be like, sure, the numbers make sense, but I want to buy it because I don't have to. And
Yeah.
then you're like, what? It's a deal
Or I want
though.
to buy it. I want to buy it at 60%, right?
Right.
I want to make
Right.
money on my refi.
Yeah.
My-
So the pendulum of like leverage in terms of like buy versus seller has shifted, and so you just got to deal with it. It is what it is. Follow the money. Where are the most amount of transactions happening right now? Who is the most willing to lend on these types of transactions? How big is the market size? And every time I do an analysis like that, I come to the same conclusion. It's starter homes in between 175,000 to 300,000 that are
Yep.
typically a little bit older, that might need work. That is the type of house that people feel the most comfortable with, that they're still willing to buy at the same rate that they were. So in the same way that which has kind of come full circle, I was telling Dom and G this yesterday, when we
Yeah.
went back and studied what made up the 20% of the hedge funds buy box, it's like
Hmm.
we're doing that same thing now, but for wholesale inventory. We're looking
Mm,
at
okay.
all the
Yeah.
deals that happen, what house makes up the largest amount of business that we can hone in on, and
And that
yeah,
just looking at that market data, like jumping on MLS and PropStream or publicly available data and seeing what's traded in the last 60 days, or what do you?
yeah. I mean, that's why we have a Tesla engineer.
That's why you hired him.
Yeah, listen, I'm not fooling anybody, man. I'm from a farm, man. I'm not that smart. I can't figure all that stuff out. I can screw with a spreadsheet, but I can't come up with rules and formulas and yeah.
Sure, yeah.
But essentially, yeah, it's just locating, looking at price points, amount of volume, tranching price point and volume, looking at a ratio between those, and then seeing which ratio is the highest.
Yep, and then going after that inventory, and you can
Mm-hmm.
be a little more aggressive there.
Yeah,
Yeah, the 3-2 made it, starter price home, 1,500 square feet.
I love it.
It's always gonna be the one, right? I mean, maybe not
Yeah,
always, but
yeah,
people
no.
like.
And there's like when I got into this, there was almost like a camaraderie of investors where we're all going to operate on the same rules. We're all going to make a very similar offer. I think I've talked to
Yeah,
you about this
yeah,
before. And what Cash Geeks did when I was flipping that made me mad was they were like, "Yeah, we don't care. We'll just buy it for whatever. We'll see if it sells." And I'm like, "This is irresponsible. This is dumb." And over time, I understood it. I understood they had exit strategies that I didn't know about, right?
sure.
But it feels like we're returning back to that, right? Where it's an even playing field. There's nobody's got the secret sauce exit strategy. It's really true sales that wins now. It's true sales
Yeah,
process, um, and we're all
I
going to
think.
be making similar offers. So may the best man win, right? And
Yeah,
so in that type of that excites me because that's an opportunity for us to get better at sales, but also it's an opportunity for every other investor to operate on an even playing field as well,
yeah,
which helps the little guy, right? If we
sure.
have to pay the same price a little guy does, the little guy who's showing up at their house is probably going to win, and we're not.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, there's still a couple people I've found that we're obviously coming across some of the same inventory and competing on offers, but there's a couple guys who maybe they don't do this full time. They're not on the pulse of the market, and they're still offering prices from 4 months ago, but they just don't go through.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and then you pick that house up 4 weeks later when they cancel that contract because they still
yeah,
think they can sell that, house in
yeah,
rough neighborhood for 90 grand, and it's just not worth 90 grand today.
yeah. It'll probably be until January till everybody's really full circle based on the seasonality of volume and everything else. I think everybody should be very well adjusted by January.
Yeah,
So we're expecting this month's going to be a little low. November's going to be a little low. December might be entirely dead. You know what I mean? Like people are looking at this past year and being like, I sold so many profitable house flips through the first 6 months of 2021 or 2022. I'm just gonna chill for the last quarter.
yeah,
I don't need to take risk, so I'm not going to. I mean, I had a great year. Like, why can't I take the win while I got one, right? There's no reason to keep, you know, what's the classic wax wings flying too close to the sun? What's the
yeah.
line for
Well, guys, please all take off, and then we can all buy properties at better prices. If
that?
anyone listening, please, it's a really good thing to take November, December off. It's great for
Yes,
your health.
I would definitely do it. We haven't prepared at all with raising our own money to buy a lot of houses in that time frame.
Yeah.
Not at all. So it's okay. Yeah.
Um, cool, man. And I know you guys want to briefly talk about how you have kind of, Cash Geeks used to be purely wholesale and hedge fund, right? And you guys have jumped in, it was last 2 months
Yeah.
into flipping, maybe a little
Yeah.
before that. Can you talk
Mhm.
about why you decided to do that?
Yeah, well, so we talk about this section of inventory that still has a high absorption rate, that still, in terms of affordability, even in a retail sense, is still a stable asset. And we look at these buyers getting picky, and it was about 2 weeks of getting lowballed on inventory that we knew was good. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, do we just undersell this? And we decided, like, I had flipped some houses. Cash Geeks did not want to flip houses. When I showed up, they were anti house flipping.
I imagine.
Um, and I would flip some here and there. So I was always in their ear. I'm like, guys, we should flip this one. We should flip this one. And so it just started to make sense. It's like, okay, we're going to sell this at a price that we would pay. So why don't
Right.
we just take it at our contract price and do the flip? It's like retail's still like okay, and this is going to sell at 240 when it's done, or 230, or like it's at
Yeah.
that price point where it's very unlikely that these rate hikes, destroy the buyer pool for us. So like, let's take some risk. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And it's been fun, man. I mean, we're learning a lot that we don't know, right?
Sure.
So we don't know much about the retail market. We're not retail agents, right? So
Yeah.
shout out Jana Jordan. She's Yellowbird's realtor. She's taken all of our listings. I used to
Is
work with
she?
her in
That's great.
20. She was our realtor in like 2017, 2018, 2019.
No way.
So it's awesome, dude. It's like full circle. I'm like, yes, this is. I remember this. It's nostalgic for me.
Yeah.
Um, it's fun, man. It's fun. It's a passion of mine. It's what I cut my teeth on.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of people need bailout buyers right now,
Sure. Yeah.
and I'm giving offers that people are hating a lot of times, and then they're having to renegotiate, and ultimately, we're getting quite a bit of traction on it. So, we want to be cautious with it. We don't want to go too hard
Sure.
too fast and have it be unmanageable, but it's humming along. It's about as much as we can handle right now.
Yep.
But I mean, we're still, a couple weeks away from getting some of our inventory moved, renewing up the pipeline, ready to hit it again. So I actually just committed to buy one literally 3 minutes before we hopped on the call. I have the contract
Okay.
sitting in my inbox. I told the guy on the phone, I'm like, don't think I'm not trying to buy this house because I don't sign this for the next hour because I'm
Oh, it's
doing an
not
interview.
signed yet? What's the address?
Oh, it's too good.
You're gonna be like, wait, how did Mike do that? How did Mike sign that when he was on the call?
Oh, that's
Um,
unreal.
you guys have a rule when you go to flip, like you're looking to make a
Mhm.
minimum of X, or you're
Yep,
not looking to
minimum.
more than X Y
Hmm.
rehab, or
Hmm. Yep. So we're calculating. We're assuming that the homes are going to lose 5% of their value by the time we get ready to sell.
from current
We're
pendings or current or recent sales.
So I'm doing two things. I'm looking at actives and I'm looking at comps. And if there's a disparity between the active and the comp, then I'm going 5K under the active. If
5K
the
under whatever's lower, whichever's lower.
Correct. If the
Yeah,
active is lower, I'm 5K under the active, which is
got it.
well below ARV.
Yep.
If my actives are even with my comps, then that's my ARV. I'm just going to shave 5% off of that just to give my heart some extra warm and fuzzies. And then we got to make a minimum 40. We've raised our own capital to reduce our transactional expenses, so we can make up for it a little bit there. And then also we have a general contractor who is hooking us up in a pretty big way. He's known G for a long time, so I think you might even work with him too, Mike. But we won't say it on air. But
I don't personally, but I know him. I know him, and
yeah, 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 yeah.
he's a good guy.
So,
Yeah.
we have a really good relationship in that front. Great realtor now with Jana. So we've kind of set it up. We've got just really high level people at every way, or
Uh,
every step of the way in the process. It makes it way easier because you can just trust the next guy knows what he's doing. You don't have to think about it. My biggest pet peeve when we flipped houses before was like, getting a call from a realtor being like, "Hey, there's a plumbing leak upstairs. The drywall fell off the ceiling. Now I got to go drive up to Callahan at 9 p.m. on a Friday to put buckets down while the plumber gets out." Like things like that. So,
yeah.
so we have like an infrastructure where we could do a lot more than we currently are, and we are excited about growing it. We just want to be smart going into the end
Sure.
of the year. We want to see what January looks like. If January looks good, then we're going to go hard. January looks bad, we're going to pay less and do less deals. But yeah, to be determined. But we
Yeah.
love it so far.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you guys have a max rehab size that you're willing to take on at this point to keep things efficient, or you guys, as long as the numbers, or you want more juice if you got a big rehab, or
Yeah, like if it's over like a $75,000 rehab, it needs to be juicy. It needs to be like
that?
70% or under in terms of like value minus
Yeah,
repairs.
yeah,
But like, I mean, a cosmetic rehab, if it's a big enough house, I mean, you can spend $65,000 easily on a
yeah,
cosmetic rehab,
yeah,
and the price between say a $45,000 cosmetic rehab or a 65, there's not really a time frame difference on those two rehabs. It's
yeah,
more so permits and major systems that slow you down and cost a lot of
sure,
money.
yeah,
So, I would say like there's two kind of discrete, like you can pay a lot in rehab and have it be a simple rehab, and I'm still okay with that. But if it's a
sure,
complicated rehab that's going to take time, which is almost just as important as the dollar amount of the rehab, I'm going to look
yeah,
at the deal in a little bit of a different way.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you said you guys have raised some private money to
Hmm.
take this stuff down, so you're saving on
Yep.
fees
No
and points.
points. No points. Points are the worst, and we're turning them in like 2 to 3 months. Um,
Sold in 2 or 3 months, or
no, we like
rehab.
rehab
Okay,
within 1 to 2 months, and then on the market by beginning of month three. So
that's
exit
good.
time frame is faster than I've ever been a part of in terms of my career flipping.
Yeah.
We've
Well, you're working
there,
with the right person.
yeah, yeah. Our
Funny
GCs,
how everyone will share everything in real, like, well, at least in our circles, right? Everyone's open about every single little thing except they won't want to share their contractors.
yeah, dude. It is one of the biggest headaches you get in this industry, man. Yeah, no, it's I would way rather have problems in any other segment than that part of the business.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, wrapping up here, I always ask two questions at the end. You're gonna have to come up with a second story because you already left the first one. But
Wow.
what's the second craziest or most uncomfortable situation that you've ever experienced with the seller?
I thought that I was going to escape this question now that I already said the story. So now I
No.
got to think. I came in prepped with that one on tap. Um, oh, I've got a good one. Okay, so I sold this house to a respectable guy in the Jacksonville investment community. This
Okay.
was this is when we started wholesaling. This is probably 2 years ago, right? Now the seller of this home, he's a bit of a character. He's got 6 people living in this house with him, and they're all super into like Magic the Gathering. Have you heard of that
Yeah.
before? Yeah. So they have like the game table set up, and dude's like wearing like the first time I met him, he just had casually just brass knuckles on and like a one of those kind of rain jackets that are black and really long. What do they call
Yeah.
those?
Yeah.
Um,
Trench coat. Trench
Yeah,
coat.
trench coat. Yeah, black fingernails, crazy piercings. But he was like kind of genuinely like not a bad guy. Like I could have a fine conversation. Like you wouldn't know that that's who he was over the phone, right?
Sure.
But he had all these kind of crazy people living in his house, and so so I'm like, I could deal with it, right? I'm young and I don't quite have that big of an issue with kind of how somebody looks or whatever. But
Yeah.
this particular buyer that I sold this house to, uh, so it was a Saturday. So I
Okay.
finally get we go under contract with the buyer, doing an inspection on a
Yep.
Saturday, and this buyer doesn't tell me he's bringing his family. So his wife and his little child show up, right?
Why would you ever do that to a wholesale walkthrough? But that's
Uh,
another.
yeah. So his wife and his kid are with him. And we get into the house, and I start seeing now that there's a child there, because it's just been me up to this point. So I'm not
Sure.
looking around too hard. Now that there's a child in this house, I'm like really looking around, like, what is this kid seeing?
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, there's like satanic posters up. There's like like all this stuff, it like drugs out, all this stuff that I didn't notice the first time. I'm like, oh, this is a like scary place. There's rabid dogs in bedrooms. People like we're knocking to get into these bedrooms to inspect each one of these six people's like living quarters, and it's like each room we go into is weirder than the next. Like just absolute living in filth, like middle-aged people, like probably 30s or 40s, but
Yeah.
just like it felt cultish. It felt like there was like a cult thing happening in this house.
Yeah.
And this guy gets so weirded out that they end up backing out of the deal because
No
of
way.
how comfortable they were in the house. Yeah. But
Wow.
I also was feeling pretty uncomfortable. I'm like, dude, I just didn't. It was just such a curveball to bring a child to something like that,
Yeah, no, it makes a difference. Yeah,
and
for
I
sure.
didn't really feel the need to disclose any of it, right? Because I'm like, whatever, it's a house. You're gonna look at it, and I dealt with this guy before, so I didn't really think too much about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, as we got in
Wow.
there, it was like, oh wow, this is something else. Uh,
Jeez.
yeah, I probably have a better one, dude. I have so many of these. I wish I should just have a whole hour of just doing that
Just a
and put
whole
it on
YouTube
YouTube.
channel of all the yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Um, so Henry Angeli said says who lends with no points, he needs a referral for that.
I'll tell you what, Henry, if you're raising private money, you can't really like advertise for it, so that makes it fun. Um,
Right.
yeah, it's a whole thing. It's you
But
got to ask without asking. But
it's pre-existing relationships, right?
correct, you just got to work your network. Yep, yep. So work your network, Henry. You'll find one.
Just hit up Hayden. He's lending at 5%, no points. So he's long
Five
a term as
points.
you need. Cool, man. So final question I always ask everyone, if you could go back in time, give yourself one piece of advice when you landed in Jacksonville, you're looking for that first deal, what would you say to yourself?
Yeah, so I should have recognized the importance, really the lifeblood of this entire business is sales.
Yeah.
And it took me probably 6 months to realize that. I thought that I could come down here with intellect and with some money and to be able to bridge that gap. And that failed incredibly. You can't outsmart a hustler's business, which that's what this is.
Yeah.
This is a pound your head against the wall type of business. So uh, I had to learn that type of work ethic, and I had to learn that applied to sales. Obviously, coming from a farm, I worked with my hands a lot growing up. It's what I tied my like satisfaction in life to.
Hmm.
So shifting out, I just didn't want to give that up. A lot of me didn't want to give that up. It didn't feel fulfilling in life for me to be a salesperson.
Sure.
So I would, if I have any piece of advice, it would have been learn the importance of sales way faster than I did. Like, don't prioritize money at all. Money doesn't matter. Work with people who are the best
Yeah.
and do things that produce the best results, which is sales. And if
Yeah.
you do those two things, it's just you can go into any segment of this business from there
Yeah.
with those kind of just two core concepts. It's really kind of my philosophy in business today.
Yeah.
Um, so, I could have saved myself a year or 2 years worth of eating crap, trying to go it alone, trying
Hmm.
to trying to outsmart what I thought this business was. You can't really outsmart it. You just got to talk to people, man. That's how it
Yeah.
works. You got to be likable. You got to be
Yeah.
confident and comfortable.
Yeah.
And it takes just reps to have all those things. You're not going to be that way off the jump. But the faster and the quicker that you do it, the better off you're going to be.
For sure.
I think I pulled that band-aid off really slowly in that first year.
Yeah.
I didn't need to.
100% agree, man. Sales is one of the most important parts. We've invested so much on our
Yeah.
end, my end, just, becoming good at sales, becoming a better sales manager makes all the
Hmm.
difference.
Yep.
Um, cool. Well, man, if anyone wants to reach out to you, questions for you, or if they have, deals they want to work with you guys, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah. So I'm not like a huge social media guy. I think that's known. So like no Instagram or anything like that. Just email me. That's my email right there, Hayden at cashgeeks.com. Um, I do deal submissions through that. I underwrite. I'm really old school, man. I like working over the phone. I like to call you. I like to, a lot of the times I'm doing role playing, like as I'm underwriting a deal, of the negotiation with the seller.
Same.
I really take it to the fullest in terms of working with other wholesalers and doing deals. So I'll say my phone number, my cell line, and shoot, man, that's
Do
the
it.
best way to reach me is just to call me. So it's 904 699 9759. And yeah, text me, call me, whatever. I stay fairly busy, so you will probably have to shoot a text if I don't answer. But it's all about spreading the knowledge and building genuine connections. Deals come from it, or they don't. It's fine. No harm, no foul. You
No
know,
big. Yep.
have a fun conversation, learn something, and keep it moving.
Yep. Cool, man. Well, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate all the knowledge you shared. And yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
being on the show.
No, thanks for having me.